Hello, everybody. I'm honored and pleased and happy to welcome Jeanette Winterson, a great writer, for this event, which is part of the public program of the exhibition Trisha Baga, The Eye, and the Ear. And it's also a major appointment of Book City, who I want to really thank for including us in this program. And Jeanette Winterson need no introduction, but here she is.
Fantastic. Here I am.
With a beautiful fireplace behind her, which makes really very intimate. Despite this digital mean, it's also possible to get very close in this difficult moment for both our countries. So it's really important to be here together, talking about culture, talking about visionary women, like Mary Shelley was, like Jeanette Winterson is. And I was saying Jeanette Winterson is one of the major British and most British and international writers. And she needs no introduction, but briefly, her first book in 1985, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, was a major international success, and also a TV series in the UK. So she was really, really young, 26, when she wrote this novel. And then she wrote major novels like Written on the Body, who's been, for my generation, like a milestone of the feminist, not feminist, but really feminine thought and literature. And she wrote recently The Daylight Gate, who's a wonderful novel about witches and also very powerful and women. The Gap of Time, and last year a very, very visionary and amazing book whose title is Frankissstein, a love story. So when this book came in my hand, I was starting to reflect on Trisha Baga public program, and I had this discussion with the artist and with the curator, Fiammetta Griccioli and Lucia Aspesi, who I say hello to. And we realized that this was really very close to many, many of the inspirations in Trisha Baga's work. The catalog just arrived today on my desk, and I wanted to show it to you, and I just show it to Jeanette, because this is a catalog, and the first page of the catalog actually is instead the first page, the opening page of Frankissstein by Mary Shelley, and the second page also, and slowly the Frankissstein by Mary Shelley transforms into Trisha Baga's catalog. So Mary Shelley is a very important reference she was incredibly visionary. More than 200 years ago, she understood what was going on with the very first Industrial Revolution and the Illuminists, and she kind of previewed what we would get to. And we are here after 200 years, 204 years in a lockdown. And I just wanted to leave very quickly to Jeanette the word by saying that it's maybe not by chance that your novel opens up with a lockdown of people locked in a house, and it all starts from there. Thank you, Jeanette.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. Look, my earphones have fallen out because I'm so excited. It's wonderful to be here. Yes, you're right. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. It's a great comparison that they are locked down, and then we're back in 1816 on Lake Geneva. And the sky is absolutely dark. They're in the most terrible storms. They can't go out. These are young people. There's Mary Shelley. There's her partner, the poet Percy Shelley. There's their great friend, Lord Byron, known as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, Britain's most famous poet, only in his early 30s. There's Byron's surgeon, Dr. John Polidori, and of course there's Byron's mistress, because Byron could never go anywhere without a mistress, and she happens to be Mary Shelley's stepsister, who's now calling herself Claire Clairmont. which is rather nice. So they're all there together, and everything's fine till it starts to rain. Of course, they've got no phones, they've got nothing to do, they can only read stories in German, they can't go out. And it's Byron who says, in this lockdown situation, let's entertain ourselves by writing a story of the supernatural. Which fitted the weather and the occasion and the general darkness all around. You know, you have to remember, this is a time where the fire would be lit like mine, there'd be a candle, but there wouldn't be any electricity. So they're absolutely closed in with the elements in a way which is hard for us to understand now, and in a very remote place. So all they have is one another and their imaginations. So Byron can't think of a story, which annoys him very much. But his surgeon, John Polidori, really comes up with one of the first vampire stories, because Polidori is interested in blood, being a surgeon, and his story is called The Vampire, about the undead. But Percy Shelley then turns to Mary and says, well, what do you think is the most frightening, Mary? The dead or the undead? But Mary doesn't think either of these is the most frightening. She thinks perhaps that which has never been biologically alive. And she has a vision of a doctor who decides to make his own life form, this time from the discarded body parts of the graveyard. And this is the story that she begins to write, the story so well known to us now, of the young scientist, ambitious, driven, Victor Frankissstein, who wonders, well, whence proceeds the principle of life? What is life made of? Now, this wasn't something that had just come into Mary Shelley's head at the time. Before the young friends had embarked on their trip to Switzerland, Italy, France, they loved Italy particularly, then they had been to a lecture by Shelley's doctor, Dr. Lawrence, in London. And the lecture had been exactly that. Whence proceeds the principle of life? And the doctor had said, look, there is no such thing as the soul. There is no super added value. Life is this. Life is us. Life is now. It's biology. It's chemistry. It's water. It's electricity. And that was a new word. You know, this is why Mary Shelley was so ahead of her time, because there was no electricity, as we've just discussed. They were in a dark place. There was no electric light, but electricity as a force had been discovered and was already being put to intriguing and interesting uses, though not domestically. Mary Shelley knew all about the voluble Italian, Signor Galvani, who had made frogs apparently come to life when he put electrodes into their legs. And he did this using the invention of another Italian, Signor Volta, from where the English get the word volt, who had worked out how to store the electrical force, as he put it, in what was then a very primitive battery. So fresh in Mary Shelley's mind were the experiments and the discoveries of Signor Volta and Signor Galvani. And of course, there had also been experiments on something a bit bigger than frogs in London, because Mary Shelley lived near Newgate Prison. This is in the East End of London. And anyone who was condemned to death for murder immediately had their body dragged away for dissection, because this was the beginning of the sort of medicalization of the body. And while we talk in English, I don't know what the word is in Italian, but you will, about operating theatres, because that's what it looked like. It looked like a theatre. There would be an area in the middle, and the action would happen there, and sitting all around, as in a conventional theatre, would be the medical students looking at what the professor was doing, which in this case was dissection. This was a very new thing entering the body. And of course, the bodies of convicts, convicted murderers, were for dissection. So some of these dead bodies were taken to see what would happen if you put an electric current in them. And what happened, of course, was that as the dead body lay there, an eye would open, a hand would raise, a leg would fly into the air. And this, of course, caused great consternation and interest for everybody. Was electricity the generating principle of life. So with all of these things in her head, Mary Shelley had gone on holiday with her lover and her friends. And of course, this became the basis of the story that we know so well, the world's most famous monster, Frankenstein's monster. But Mary Shelley wanted to do more than either write a pioneering book by a woman. I don't think she even thought she was doing that at the time, or a horror story. She wanted to bring in all the things that mattered to her. You know, Mary Shelley's mother was one of the first feminists, Mary Wollstonecraft, who in 1794 had written a book called A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. So Mary's mother was a great feminist, but Mary had never known her because Mary Wollstonecraft died when little Mary was only 10 days old. So she had never known her mother, about whom much was written, much gossip, much scandal, the usual business of a woman, especially at that time, making a name for herself and challenging the norms of the day. And it was Mary Shelley's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, who said, you must educate women. Women are only decorative objects because society makes them so. They must be educated. Or, she said, they will be monsters. They may be pretty monsters, but they will be monsters. Now, if you think about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, what happens to the poor monster? Victor, his father, refuses to educate him. So the monster suffers the same fate as every woman in England and elsewhere at that time. No formal education. And the monster must educate himself. And this is a poignant reflection by Mary Shelley on the condition of woman as the outcast in society at the time. And of course, the monster, because he's not educated, because he's not acknowledged, he's not even named. Remember, Victor Frankenstein doesn't name his monster. That's why, you know, in the great Hammer horror movies, we all get mixed up and think when we're little that the monster is Frankenstein, because he has no name, literally. He is abandoned, nameless and uneducated by his creator, who is disgusted by what he's done. And the tragedy of Mary Shelley's novel is what unfolds from that, the uneducated outcast in society. So when I was rereading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I did because it was the 200th anniversary of publication in 2018, and I hadn't read it since I was 21, I realized that this book was more than all the things that it has been up to this time, that it was something else. It was a message in a bottle. It had been thrown out across space-time, waiting for us, the first generation, who can read this book in a completely different way, because we are the first generation who understand that we will soon share the planet with non-biological life forms. We are creating our own life forms, viably, visibly, for the first time. And so we are the inheritors of Victor Frankenstein's experiment, with all its ambition and all its terrible danger. But it's us. So we have a duty to read this novel differently, to see it in a different light, and to take away from it all kinds of new messages. And because for myself, I've been reading a lot about artificial intelligence, about women working in tech or not working in tech, about where computer science might be leading us. I wanted to understand. I've always been interested in science, and especially in tech. So it was a strange moment when my personal reading of just trying to understand the world as it is now coincided with rereading Mary Shelley's visionary book. And I thought, I want to write something here, not an essay. I want to write a work of fiction of my own, which will try and show my reader how this 200-year arc from Mary Shelley's vision, just at the start of the first industrial revolution, the start of the machine age, has brought us here now as time has accelerated, because that is perhaps the most important legacy of industrialization. Everything accelerates. We feel that in our daily lives. And that acceleration was something that was just beginning in Mary Shelley's day. Life was a lot slower. There was a lot more leisure, even though we think of it as being sort of crucifyingly difficult in many ways for us. They did have time, and we don't. And that's part of acceleration. So I wanted to look at all of that. And I thought, how can I do this? So I thought, okay, I'll tell that story, starting in the famous Villa Diodati, in that fateful summer of 1816. And I'll take everyone that's in the room and I'll just bring them forward now into the 21st century, so that Mary Shelley becomes a young trans doctor called Mary Shelley, because I thought Mary had such a vast imagination. She wouldn't want to be limited to one gender, and I won't do that. And it also seems the right thing to bring in a trans character now, where we are. So Mary Shelley goes through the mirror, a bit like Alice in Wonderland. She comes out the other side as Mary Shelley, the young trans doctor. Victor Frankissstein becomes Victor Stein, a charismatic, troubled, difficult, dangerous individual working at the forefront of tech and AI, who falls in love with Mary Shelley, to fairly disastrous consequences. But I also had to bring the others in. So Lord Byron, always arrogant and posturing, although I'm rather fond of him, became an inventor of sex dolls called Ron Lord, who makes an absolute fortune making sex dolls. He has a huge factory because that's all anybody wants. And as you know, sex dolls are really on the increase at the moment. And they're getting smarter and scarier, and they can talk to you as well as just be positioned on your bed with 3 holes. So I thought, no, I have to bring the whole sex industry in here, because that is a big part of tech and where we are now. So that's what I did. And I wanted the reader just to be able to pass through the space of 200 years into this space, and to go on a journey, go on Mary Shelley's own journey. She only lived to 53, and they didn't live so long then. Of course, they didn't think they had short lives because they had the lives they had. But that young woman achieved so much, and she lost Shelley 8 years later. He was drowned and in Italy. And her own life, is both so packed full. She lost 4 children, much more than we can imagine in our own lives, which seem stretched out. And yet she was this visionary who was waiting to connect us to the future. So all of that had to be written about, and where we are now in tech. And of course, I realized that when I got to the future, that no matter how crazy anything I could think of was, it had already happened. It was a little like Margaret Atwood when she was talking about The Handmaid's Tale, and she said, I didn't have to make anything up, and I didn't. So everything, all the tech, the science that's in my Frankissstein is real. I didn't make it up. Not the cryonics facility in Arizona where you can be put in a frozen state hoping to reanimate yourself when the technology's there. All of that is real. So there's no, in that sense, there's no fiction. And I wanted to think about also how far we've come really in the last 70 years, because we think of computing technology really beginning after the Second World War, particularly in Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing, of course, working to break the German code, the Enigma code with the Nazis. That's when computing really began. And we think how far that has taken us and how crazy it is. Your iPhone now, you may be watching this on an iPhone. It's got 8.5 billion chips in there to power it, but the Apollo 11 went to the moon using 12,500 chips. So it's quite amazing, what we've done and where we've come from. So I wanted to talk about that as well, and where tech is likely to take us next, and whether or not particularly women will have any future in this coming world. at the moment, it's looking a little bit doubtful. So those were all the things that I wanted to bring in to talk about this, but above all, to give you, the reader, a sense of this 200-year span from Mary Shelley's day in the early 1800s, you know, so soon after the French Revolution, 1789, so soon after the American Declaration of Independence, it was 1776, how quickly things have moved since then, through the factory age, the age of the machine, into the digital age, the information age, and now into the age where we expect to have software, personal assistant that is non-human, Siri, Alexa. That's just the beginning of where we're heading now. So that's what I wanted to talk about.
Well, that's a lot. That is
fascinating. I know it's a lot. Listen, now I have to have a little drink of my champagne, and I hope that everybody who's with me, including you, where is your red wine?
This is my red wine.
Hey. Salut.
Cheers. Salut. It's so typical.
To everybody who's here with us, please raise a glass, whatever it is.
Yes. So,
and to you.
Yes. So I just wanted to, from the very first moment, maybe I'm wrong, because you always very often talk about this, you know, this idea of time revolving and getting back and back. And of course, this book, it's all about that. And there is a scene where they sit in this bar and they say we could be in 1816. And yes. It came to my mind a reference that, not by chance, is also one of the reference of our artist, which is Orlando. This idea of Mary Shelley crossing time and gender in order to find love, and also the second title of your novel, you know, a love story, made me ask myself if you had also Virginia Woolf and Orlando in mind when you wrote this novel.
Yes. It's strange you should ask that, actually, because I'm just doing a telly, well, the beginning of a pilot of what we hope will be a telly play for Orlando, as several series. So if that comes off, that will be great. So I'm working on Orlando right now. So Orlando has very much been there. But yes, I mean, Woolf, as you know, wrote the first novel, both where there was a transgender character, because that's what Orlando is, and also a time traveler. Before there was time traveling, you know, you had a Rip Van Winkle, and you had H.G. Wells, The Time Machine, but time traveling wasn't a big deal. And Woolf did it, it's in a linear sense, chronologically, because Orlando moves through 350 years of history from Elizabeth I in England up to 1928, which for Woolf is the present day, and passes through all of that as a woman, doesn't change gender again. But yes, because I think at the beginning of the 20th century, you know, that was with Woolf certainly as a pioneer, that was another understanding that what we think of as the fixed form of the body is really approximate. And for me, one of the interesting things about AI is that, of course, it's actually it's electrical. It doesn't need a body like we do. It's questioning the whole idea of what intelligence is and even what consciousness might be. And it entertains me enormously as someone who was brought up in the Christian church and was told always, you know, your body is not your final destination. This world is not your home. You're not bound to matter. You know, the soul lives on and goes somewhere else. To me, this is all part of the same story, that the physical form, the biological self, is actually an evolutionary stage. It isn't the final word for us as humans. It's certainly not the final word for intelligence, and it may not be the final word for consciousness. Look, you have a wonderful physicist in Italy, you know, Carlo Rovelli, whose work I followed for a long time, quantum physicist. He's just so great. You know, he's written a book, Reality is Not What It Seems to Be, and it's this energetic engagement with the idea that what looks solid isn't. what looks fixed is not, that these are approximations. And Woolf, of course, was using that in Orlando, because Orlando is a handsome young man about town who wakes up as a woman. And as Woolf says, in same person, different sex. And so, yes, when I was thinking about what to do with Mary Shelley, when I move her into the 21st century, I thought she had to have that expansiveness. I mean, I don't know about you, but if we could ever upload our brains, which maybe we will, that means that we can download ourselves into any shape we like. So all those shape-shifting stories of one day I'm an eagle, one day I'm a greyhound, today I'm a girl, tomorrow I'm a boy, they won't have to be fantasies. They can be realities. And this is, we're just at the beginning of this, but it's as though everything that we have imagined, both as in our religious understandings, the body's not the final destination, and in our myths, all our stories about shape-shifting, it's as though we sensed a place we would come to. You know, like travelers who set off on a journey they cannot imagine completing, but future generations will complete it. You know, like the people who built cathedrals, they knew that they wouldn't do it, their children wouldn't do it, their grandchildren wouldn't do it. How long would it take in order to build this amazing edifice that we see around us now in our built heritage? And for us, it is the same. Human beings are still evolving. We're still moving. This is not the last chapter. And I think, you know, artists and often religious thinkers have been very good at understanding that. And now science is also saying, you know what? It's not the last chapter. This is not the end of the human story. It might be if we're stupid enough to destroy the planet. But if we can just keep things going a little further, we might find that our inventions can also liberate us from so many constricting, tedious ideas, as much about gender and biology as anything else. I mean, how are you going to be so fixated on he's a boy, she's a girl, when you have non-biological life forms? You can pretend to gender them. You can call Siri and Alexa female, but that is so much a construct. And anybody can see that because they're not. So how are we going to deal with this? It's going to affect all our views about gender. And I think that's liberating.
So this is a very optimistic view, because in your novel, I also had the sense that your idea, which is not just your idea, many people think, and you put this in the mouth of your characters, that for planet Earth, the extinction of a human race is not the worst destiny ever. So ecology is not directly addressed in your novel, but of course it's always present. So what is your point of view on the situation? I also listened to an interview that you did just before the pandemic, when you said, it struck me, you said, you know, we're acting like we did before World War II, like if everything was normal and things were changing, but not so much. Instead, something huge is going to happen. It's going to happen very, very fast. And you say, maybe you talked about the Brexit. You said it's so crazy. We think about the Brexit, but maybe in 12 years, this planet won't be here anymore. So I just wanted to know what your thought about this ecology matter. And I thought you were very pessimistic, but in a way, this is also very optimistic, what you just said.
Well, here's the problem. By nature, I am an optimist. It's who I am. I'm always looking for where the good is. And I'm also a cheerful person. So, you know, I have to have a reason to be unhappy. I don't need a reason to be happy. So, you know, that's being upbeat is like my default position. But I'm not stupid. And I can see what we've done to our beautiful world. And we began to do it at the beginning of industrialization, when we started to get fossil fuels out of the ground. That's the moment. It gave us tremendous power. Getting coal out of the ground to begin with before oil. It's what gave my country, Britain, that huge lead over other countries, because we had lots of coal. And coal is 10 times hotter than wood, and you can keep a stable temperature. And so something as simple as that allowed things to happen in the Industrial Revolution. It meant that you could fire up a furnace, you could run a factory. Coal manufacturing did all of that. But it's the moment when pollution starts to happen in a way which just wasn't there before. You had contaminants and poisons, but you didn't have certainly atmospheric pollution until you began to get fossil fuels out of the ground. And that's what's got out of control. It's our dependence on fossil fuels. And as you know, the fossil industry is heavily subsidized. It does not make a profit on its own. It's just not allowed to fail by vested interests, which disgusts me. Greta Thunberg is right. If we're going to apply the rules of the free market, then could we please apply them and stop giving subsidies to big oil? Let them stand on their own 2 feet, because they can't. And that's what's so maddening. We're always told by the kind of liars in the industry, oh, you can't have all these new technologies because they need all this money and they're not ready yet. It's big oil that needs all the money. So we have to face up to these things. And, I'd say to anybody, do all the research for yourself. Whenever you want to know something, you need to read so much now to just get at the truth. Find accredited sources, and see what's really going on. That does matter. So of course I'm worried. I love this planet Earth. I have a beautiful garden. I live in a wood. I feel that this is my home, and I shall miss it. I shall miss it when I'm dead. Sometimes I walk around thinking, I'm so glad to have seen this, when it's a wonderful day, whether it's the sunshine or the rain, just that pleasure of being a human body on this hospitable earth. And yet I think we are doing enormous damage, and I hope we can stop it. Part of what I hope is that we get to the point where we have artificial intelligence, which is at present a tool, to guide us in some of the decisions that we might make. Because, look, whatever else AI is going to be, it's not going to be interested in status symbols in the way that human beings are. AI doesn't want a yacht. It doesn't want a private island. It doesn't need 20 automobiles in the garage. It's going to look at us and think, dude, what do you need it for? It doesn't even eat, let alone sleep. So this is going to be a very different kind of intelligence, and one that has a different agenda if we can bring it in. That's why I think in evolutionary terms, we need to make this leap now. And we do have a chance. Look, if the Trumps of this world are allowed to run round, it's over and out, done. And I don't believe that life on Earth will regenerate, because the Earth is now so much hotter. The sun itself is much hotter than it was billions of years ago when life here began. It's not straightforward. It's not that we'll all go and everything will come back. Just give it enough time. If we wreck this, it's a real shame. So look, on both things. The technologies are in place to save this planet. We do have the technologies. What we need now is the will to use them. And if we get there, then we have a future. And that's amazing. But, if we're just going to be like a giant version of Texas with guns, God, and oil, then we don't have a future.
Great, thank you. There's a question from the public. Sara Chiesa asked, what do you think about the lack of women in the tech, and what do you think more women in technology would be a solution or could help in some way?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it is worrying, you're right, because certainly the numbers of women in tech hover at around 20-25%. There's more in India, it's about 34%. strangely, because women in India are being encouraged to go into tech because it's seen as something that women can do at home in a safe environment. So it's one of those odd situations where quite a chauvinist culture is encouraging women to do tech. I know, things never just go in the straight line, do they? But it's, there's a lot of arguments. There's all the biological essentialists, you had one. It was Alessandro Strumia, wasn't it, from the University of Pisa, who stood up at CERN, where the nuclear station in Switzerland, and just said, well, this was to a load of women who were new in physics, and said, actually, women don't do physics because basically you're not clever enough. This was very upsetting from the wonderful University of Pisa, who have had words about it. He said, but he's not the only one. James Demers at Google put in that memo in 2017 saying, we've got all the women in tech that we're ever going to have, and it's because they just don't want to do it. It's crazy because it doesn't take long to look back in the history of computing, which is a new industry, to see that women were there right from the Second World War. They were at Bletchley Park doing the decoding. They were working those first computing machines, which were massive. All the women in America who programmed the ENIAC, which was the world's first storage computer, who were written out. You've probably seen the film Hidden Figures about the women who worked on the NASA program. Women were absolutely there, but the environment was hostile. And, women, unsurprisingly, don't like working in a hostile environment. So there's that. Why would you? If you're a smart girl, you think, I can do something else. I've got two goddaughters who are very clever girls. They both went to Oxford, but for their A-levels, I don't know what it is, the equivalent is in Italy, but they did maths and further maths. One of them actually has gone into neuroscience, but the other one, who can code, finds it so easy, just said, I'm not working with those guys. She's gone to work for the Institute of Government Policy here now. So I think choices are being made which are not about, I want a nice, friendly career with lots of people. It's that I don't want to work with those bloody guys. So we need to think about that. And we also need to think about encouraging women to get into tech. Gaming is a real issue because a lot of guys are encouraged into gaming early. And that means that far fewer women then go and study gaming or computer science because it's seen as a boy thing. So a lot of this is the way that we've structured society. And we do that and we then say, oh no, it's because women have got different brains. If you put two brains in a bucket, you won't be able to tell which is male and which is female. It just doesn't work like that. And there have been enough studies to show now that these are the massive pressure on women to either to say you can't do it or you don't want to do it is what's pulling women out of these exciting subjects. So absolutely, yes, we do need to get more women and girls interested, and there's fantastic initiatives to do that. It's going to take a bit of time, and as an illustration, let me point out something really obvious, like medicine. All around the world now, at least half with doctors, half now are women. It's so common. At the beginning of the 20th century, take two countries, Britain and the United States, only 5% of medical doctors were women. And now it's over 50%. During that time, women's brains have not changed. They're not suddenly able to do medicine when previously they were not able to do medicine. What changed? Were all the barriers in the way, letting women in, letting women study. And look, if you can be a doctor, you can learn to code. There is absolutely no problem with women programming and coding because the human body is pretty complex. And if you can manage that, you can write your algorithms.
Oh, and I have an observation by Simona Giroldi, who says, just an observation, in Italian committee for the COVID, we don't have one single woman. It's a committee of like 50 people, and you see the results. And while it's demonstrated that the countries that have better managed the COVID crisis are managed by women, so that's just an observation.
Oh, she's right. It's crazy. You have to just complain. Just say, guys, this is 2020. Get some women in there.
Yes. Also, I'd like to quote another part of your novel where you say, actually, Mary Shelley says, there are two who live in each other, do they not? Frankenstein in the monster in Frankissstein, end of quote. And I reconnected this phrase to an interview of yours where you noticed that intelligence separated from feeling generates monstrosity. So I would like you to elaborate on this if you want.
Yes, I think it's important to be an integrated human being. And in the Western world, all our thoughts, all our education, our social structures, they go right back to the Greeks, back to Aristotle, back to Plato. And it's all about reason and logic being the most important things. Aristotle says that whatever the supreme being, i.e. God, does all day, what that God does is to reason, to think. And that's therefore the most important thing that any human being can do. And this gets passed on. And the idea was that women were not capable of reason. Women were intuitive or emotional, but they weren't very good at thinking. And that logic, rationality, objectivity was so important. We know how disastrous those views have been for the progress of humankind. It's not enough to invent smart gadgets or even to improve the living situation of millions of people. If actually people are unhappy, if they're still wanting to kill each other, which we are, if we're still having pointless wars, if we're here to destroy the planet, the project of pure intelligence divorced from feeling, from compassion, from emotional intelligence has been pretty disastrous. And it's not a male brain, female brain thing at all. It's about how to live as a complete and whole human being. Remember Descartes, the I think, therefore I am man, who started the whole split between mind and matter.
Disaster.
Disaster. But, it was Descartes who said that animals are actually just biological automata. They don't feel pain. White guys get let off a lot of stupidity. So having said this, of course, it opens a doorway from then on to the horrible treatment of animals in farming, in science, just in the everyday, that you say, oh, it doesn't matter how I treat the dog, the cat, the cow, the monkey, it doesn't feel any pain. It's just an automatic response. Absolutely horrible, and also so stupid. That's what drives me mad. When you read some of these white dudes, you just think, how can you be so stupid? Have you never had a cat or a dog? Of course, the answer is yes, but they were so busy doing pure thinking. So we have to be really careful of this and not get stuck in a kind of mindset that says compassion doesn't matter, emotional intelligence doesn't matter. We have to care for one another. Kindness is just so important. And having that generosity of spirit towards other people. It's exactly the opposite of what Trump's been doing in America. We're fighting fascism again, aren't we? All over Europe, particularly in America. And there is no kindness there. And it's something that all of us as human beings, it doesn't matter whether you're in the arts, the sciences, who you are, you can stand up for kindness and say, I'm not going to treat other people in this way.
Great. I have one observation from the public. Elisa Bolchi said, I had the opportunity to listen to an interview to Rita Levi-Montalcini, talking about scientists, dating back to the 70s, in which she said how the percentage of people successful in hard science, like mathematics and physics, was higher in women, proving that the idea that women are not fit for science is simply proved wrong by number. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that now the sensibility, how do you envision today in the present the situation of women in society. It's very wide, but of course things have changed, but of course not every country is the same. But it's amazing to me that, like in the United States, which is way ahead, somebody like Trump could still be there, and not anymore. So what is your feeling about the role that women can have today as compared to what the situation was at the time of Mary Shelley?
I mean, if Mary Shelley and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, were here now, of course, they would both be rejoicing to see how far women have come in such a short time. You know, we have to remember how short a time it is, from the late 19th century, really, as women began to make gains, be able to vote, to be accepted into university, you know, to get an education. We've had so little time, girls, so little time to make our mark, and yet we have done so much. And that's what gives me tremendous hope, that in really, it's 150 years maximum, more like 120, you know, for women to start advancing, coming forward, and where we've got to, it's really quick. It's part of the acceleration that we've seen happening, which is an interesting phenomenon at every level. Women are here, and I just hope that we don't begin to lose those gains. And it's up to all of us, you know, especially women who are older, who have seen the progress that women have made. Lots of young women have come along now and think, oh, maybe it was always like this. No. And so we have to keep the education going and just make sure that there is that connection and continuity, and we don't get separated from one another across time. So important to know your history, always to know how you got here, politically, and for your own gender, if you're a woman. You know, how did we get here? You know, we didn't just arrive fully formed. We got here by a process, and we really need to know that. You know, and one of the projects of the alt-right, of the new fascism, we've seen it most glaringly in America, though it's not been entirely absent, certainly in my country or in yours, is just trying to cut people off from truth, including historical truth, how we got here, what the world was like, what the enormous achievements have been of socialist politics, of the left, things like, you know, more opportunity, not only for women, but for everybody, workers' rights, protection. You know, we just had that terrible ruling in California where Uber put 200 million into striking down the lawsuit, which said they had to treat their drivers as employees. So Uber put in $200 million, which is massive money, to get it struck down. So that's such kind of big victory for the wrong kind of tech, for the tech that says everybody means nothing. It's only money that matters. And we have to fight that. Of course we do. But also we need to be able to say, look, so many men and women alike fought during the years of industrialization for workers' rights, to have a secure job, decent pay, decent housing, you know, some welfare if things went wrong, health, education. We fought for those things, and we mustn't let them be taken away, especially not when people don't understand what that fight was. And it looks like we're going to have to win it all over again. So there's big challenges for women and men alike, you know, and I hope that we will come together. You know, we need to work together, all of us now, but to save the planet and to push back this frightening threat of the rise of the right, because there won't be anything left if those guys take over.
All right. So if, you know, so much has been said, and the time is almost over. So
how did it go so quickly?
It was very, very intense. And well, if you just want to close by telling something about what you're working about on Virginia Woolf, because really Virginia Woolf was another big talk of this exhibition and of all our public program, what you're working on.
Yes, and we have to remember that, you know, when Virginia Woolf, Orlando was published in English in 1928, and that was the year in England when all women got the vote. You know, in 1918, only some women did. You had to be over 30 and you had to own property. So it was for middle-class women, better-off women. Only in 1928 did all women in Britain get the vote and the same terms as men. And of course, Virginia Woolf had lived through this time. She'd been a woman who couldn't vote, a woman who wasn't educated like her brothers, like her husband, like all the friends that she knew who'd all been to Cambridge. She was self-taught, as so many women were at that time. And Orlando, as well as being a time-traveling novel and a trans novel, is really like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a novel about what women have to put up with in the wider world when they're not educated, when they don't have property rights. Orlando wakes up as a woman and finds that she can no longer inherit her own house. It's taken away from her. She has no rights at all. And the only thing that has happened is that she's now in a female body instead of a male body. And Woolf uses that so cleverly then to show up the ridiculous sexism and prejudice of the patriarchy that she lived in. So what I'm doing now with this series is, again, it's about bringing Orlando into the present day, because Woolf does end it in 1928, which was her present day. So what we've decided to do is bring it forward into our present day. So we start with a very modern, very new Orlando, about whom I really can't say much, but if they won't let me. But it's exciting. And the Orlando that I hope will go to 8 parts on your screens while we're all still alive to do it will be on Orlando who's in our time and also goes through the journey that we read about in Virginia Woolf's novel. So and also, of course, a sex-changing Orlando.
It's not a book, so is it a series?
No, it's for TV.
Oh, fantastic. So
yes.
Oh, that's
amazing. Is the world ready?
So we look forward to.
Yeah, it's the American company Legendary have commissioned it. So we will see what happens. But it's really a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah, so we all look forward to be able to see it. So Jeanette, I just wanted to thank you so much, and I really hope that our audience enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed it. And I bet there will be chances to have you in present for many other occasions.
Please, let me come to your beautiful city. And
yes,
the time when we can kiss everybody and go and eat wonderful food.
Really Frankissstein, and this is physically. So I cheer to you with our Italian wine, and thank you to everybody. Thank you to the public of.
Thank you.
Otherwise, to the public of Book City, to the public of Pirelli and Garbicocca, and to my colleagues that helped me make this possible. And see you in presence. It's a promise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.